Hello, one and all. Thank you so much for joining me today. Sun is not quite shining, a little bit rainy. Not that I'm doing a weather forecast, but the thunder is out, so it does sound quite exciting sometimes. But thank you for joining me today for episode 12. Whether you're joining me on YouTube, which is the new venture as we know, or joining me on Spotify, hopefully you'll still be able to get the relevant information and get some good knowledge out of today's podcast. And today's podcast is going to be around challenging conversations, because challenging conversations are something that people come up against very often, and it's a difficult thing for people to do. But I'd like to believe and I like to think that actually a lot of the problems that we put into it are probably from ourselves. They're thoughts that we have. So it's based on somebody that I was speaking to the other day, a friend of mine. It's not based on them, but it was just a conversation that I was having with them. And we were just talking about challenging conversations, and it just popped up that it was a good one to have to follow, and particularly from effective communication. I don't necessarily plan for them to flow so nicely, but it just seems to have happened each time. I take credit, but I didn't mean to do it. But the challenging conversation does follow on from effective communication, because in order to be able to have that effective communication, you need to be able, in order to have that challenging conversation, you need to be able to communicate effectively. But there are lots of other things that come into it as well. Our mindset, the words that we choose to use, so the power of the words, emotional intelligence, of course, we knew it would be there. But today is really not telling you that you're doing it wrong, or that actually you need to change completely. But what today I hope is just a reflection for you to think about how you approach these challenging conversations. I do have some notes down, so if you do see me kind of looking to the side, it's just double checking the notes, but a lot of it is up here, most of it's up there. It's just making sure that I get it all down. But I do truly feel that actually the conversations are challenging because of many different reasons. It can be the topic, it can be the person you're speaking to, but ultimately one thing we do forget or not necessarily reflect upon is ourselves. And when I do coaching with people and when I work with people, particularly around having challenging conversations, one thing I just ask them to reflect upon is themselves firstly. Not looking at the person, not necessarily looking at the topic, but just thinking about themselves, and in this case, thinking about yourself. And how do you go into those conversations? How do you approach a challenging conversation? Because what will happen is most people will go into it thinking it's going to be bad. We've got a challenging conversation coming up with so-and-so. I know it's going to be bad. I know it's going to go in a negative way. They're not going to take what I want to say on board. But a lot of what's being said there in what I've just given as an example is just in your mind. You've put that there in the sense that you may not necessarily know exactly how that person's going to react. And if we go into a challenging conversation with a preconceived judgment that it's going to go badly or it's going to go poorly, chances are that's actually what's going to happen. So you need to be able to reflect on yourself and think, actually, is it the case that it is challenging, or am I making it more challenging within myself? Not necessarily making the conversation when you have it more challenging, but challenging within yourself. And sometimes we are our own worst critic. I've said in episode 3, The Power of Words, we shouldn't be our own worst critic. We should be our own best analyzer. But we will put ourselves down. We will put ourselves in those situations whereby we almost talk ourselves out of things. So we need to reflect and think about where we are. So when you are going to go into a challenging conversation, or if you know that a challenging conversation is going to happen, just think about why it's challenging. Because the topic doesn't have to be challenging. It's only there if we perceive it to be there. There may be a performance issue, but actually, why is there a performance issue? Why is there a behavioral issue? Why is there an attitude issue? Whatever the challenging conversation might be around, there's usually a reason why. Of course, there are going to be some conversations. I'm not naive. I realize there are going to be some conversations that actually they are going to be a challenging conversation because the topic is challenging. Yeah, so something has to be done about something, and actually it's having an impact on other people. The outcome may not be seen as favorable for the person that you're having a conversation with, but Ultimately, again, that's as a last kind of element. Anything before that, we can work on, we can talk about. So there's always a why in terms of that challenge, that challenging conversation. So think about why you're having this conversation in the first place. Okay. Think about the other person. Think about how that person is. Do they like to take on feedback? Do they get defensive? Do they get defensive when you give them feedback? But one thing I do say when people get defensive, again, is look at yourself. We know that I'm a big believer in emotional intelligence, and I think there's an element of self-awareness that has to be recognized within these challenging conversations. So I have some water. So there is some element where you have to be self-reflective. You have to look at yourself, because if somebody is being defensive, I get some people don't like to take on feedback, but if people are being defensive, you might find that actually you are being offensive. So if you go into a challenging conversation where it's going to be a difficult conversation, you have to address behaviors or you have to address performance, then sometimes what you'll find is you'll go in on the offensive. And if you go in on the offensive, the only natural thing for people to do is to go on the defense. And I know it's not always that easy if you're on the other side. If the offense is coming, it's very hard not to be defensive. But look at that in that situation where you're the one that's potentially going in on the offense. And by offense, I don't mean you have to go in aggressively, but it's just straight to business, straight down to this. So how are we doing this? What's wrong with that? How? And the way that we're talking, the way that we're getting our information across is going to have an impact on that individual. So just look at yourself. Are you going into that challenging conversation in an offensive manner? Yeah, are you going in a way that will make that individual be defensive? Again, there are people I know that are just defensive naturally. They don't like feedback. They don't like any form of development feedback. They don't like any form of feedback. So there are people out there that can be very challenging. They can't, they're not always necessarily going to take it on board, but most people actually are okay with it. It's about how you embrace it, it's how you deliver it. And if we're looking at this challenging conversation, it's almost like feedback. And I do like to talk about feedback as a gift. And a gift is something that you can take or not take, or you take it, you gift it on, you throw it away. But it's like a gift. And if you wrap a gift horribly, don't put any time, don't put any effort into it, that person isn't going to fully appreciate that. They're going to look at this gift and think, what's this? It's a bit dodgy. But if you take time, if you take effort in what you're doing, if you put some passion into it, if you actually demonstrate to that person you've thought about what's happening and you've wrapped that gift nicely and you give it to that person, they might not necessarily like the gift, but what they will fully appreciate is the way it's been wrapped, the way it's been delivered to them. Yeah, with a smile on the face, not like a grizzly bear. But everybody is different in how they do things. But again, I believe that everybody can reflect on how they do it. So think about that gift, think about that feedback, because that's effectively what's happening here is you're looking to give feedback. So you as the leader, you as the person, you as the individual who is instigating this challenging conversation, think about what you're doing, because you are giving feedback. You are leading that conversation. So wrap it nicely, wrap it in a way that demonstrates you've thought about it. You've given it some consideration, because ultimately you can influence massively the way that conversation goes. If you go in that offensive manner, they will be defensive. If you go in with that preconceived judgment that that person is going to kick off, they're not going to accept it, they're not going to enjoy it, then again, you're not going to get there. You're not going to have that successful outcome, because you're psychologically priming yourself for that outcome. So that's what you're effectively looking for subconsciously. You're not deliberately going into it, but that's what you're going to be looking for. And when you see it, that's what you're going to pick up on. And then that's what you're going to remember. And then I guarantee you that challenging conversation that didn't necessarily have to be challenging now becomes very, very challenging, because you're seeing what you're seeing, because you're looking for it. And once you've seen it, once you've looked at it, that's what you focus on. That's what you then go for. So we need to have an open mindset. Going back to podcast number 10, it is about that open mindset. thinking about how we embrace things, how we go into things, how we do things, that makes a huge, huge difference, because we can influence it. So think about that. Actually, the challenging conversation is a two-way thing. And I'm using the word challenging conversation because that's how people do it. But for me, it's just a conversation. We don't have to look at it as a challenging conversation. We can just look at it as a conversation. And in any conversation, it's a two-way process. So if you are there having this conversation, one of the biggest things, one of the absolute paramount, biggest thing that you can do is to actively listen. Actually listen to what's being said. Listen not to respond, but listen to understand. So give yourself that time to reflect on what's being said. Don't be afraid of an awkward silence, because actually those awkward silences can be golden. It just leads into where we kind of need to be and what it is that we need to do. So really think about it being a two-way conversation. So you're going to ask questions. You're going to engage in that conversation, but let them speak. Let them have that voice and actually listen to them. Not just let it be heard, but actually listen to them. Listen to understand. Because when you understand a little bit more, you realize that there's a reason behind any of the issues that might have been there. Yeah, so if we're thinking about the earlier stage, not the very, very last stage where you might be having to dismiss somebody or let somebody go, I'm thinking before that, because for me, we don't have to get to that point, because there's always a why. So if I'm entering into a challenging conversation with somebody about not having completed something, or a behavioral issue or performance issue, whatever it might be, I need to understand why that hasn't been achieved. I need to understand why what it is that needed to be done hasn't been done, because there is a reason. Even if that person just sat there and thought, yeah, you know what, I'm not going to do it. It's not a great reason, but there's a reason why it didn't happen. But from there, my next question is, well, why didn't you want to do it? And really what I guess I'm trying to allude to is going back to podcast number 8, when we looked at change and why me, why now. It's the why. It is honestly the why in what's happening. So if you can go into the challenging conversation, again, using the word challenging, but if you can go into that challenging conversation and you go into it not to reprimand, not to tell off, not to slap the knuckles, not to shout at, not to do anything like that, but actually go in there to talk, to effectively communicate, to actively listen to what's being said back to you, to listen to understand, then actually you're going to find out the why. When you find out that why, everything moves on. And again, the reason why could be so many different things. It can be issues at home, it can be issues at work, it can be overload. Sometimes it can even be you as a manager not actually having given that support. Could have been you as a manager not checking in, not having the additional resources. It could be the business, the organization. There's so many different reasons why things aren't achieved. And there's so many reasons why we need to have that challenging conversation. But if we can find out that reason why, then actually we're able to move forward with it. And that for me is a really huge, huge thing. So we need to be able to reflect. So the first thing I say is reflect upon ourselves. Okay, why are we thinking it's a challenging conversation? Who said it's going to be a challenging conversation? Because it's very unlikely the person that's going to receive it. So we need to have a challenging conversation. Unlikely. You've probably said, oh, I need to have a challenging conversation with so-and-so. Straight away, the rhetoric that you're using is making it a challenging conversation. So that's where your head is going. That's where your mind is going. So just say, I need to have a conversation with so-and-so about whatever it is. If we put the words there, it's going to make a difference. But really think about when you're in there and having that conversation. It is, again, that conversation. It's a two-way process, but try to go into it almost as a coach. You know, you're not going in there as a leader, as a manager, as a reprimander, as a judge, executioner, all of that stuff. You're not going into those extremes, but go into it just to understand, to find out a bit more, to learn a bit more about that individual, the situation, and you'll learn about yourself as well. But go into it with an open mind and go into it as a coaching conversation potentially, where you can use different models, find out what's happening, find out where they're at the moment, find out what can be done to move forward, find out what they will do once you've identified those things. And actually what you do is you're empowering that individual to take ownership and accountability over what it is they do. There's lots of different coaching models that can be used. I might save that for another podcast just to delve into it a bit more. But there's a lot that can be used. But just going into it to identify where we're at, what's happening, why are we here, why are we having this conversation? All right, so you can identify that, and then just recognizing what they've done. But look at things that are changeable. Don't focus on things that are in their circle of concern, but they can't do anything about. Focus on behaviors, focus on attitudes. But again, if there are behaviors and attitudes, then talk about the why. Why has your attitude changed? Why did you demonstrate this behavior? There's a reason behind it. And yes, it might take a bit more delving to go through and a bit more time to get information. But in the long run, I promise you it's going to benefit you. It really, really will benefit you. It will help you to get to where you need to get to. It will help you to grow as an individual. But that, again, using the word, that challenging conversation will just become a conversation. The topic can be interesting, doesn't have to be challenging. Okay, the person that you're speaking to doesn't have to be in a state of issue or causing you issue, because you may have put that preconceived judgment there. Just because somebody acted in a certain way today doesn't mean they're going to act in that way tomorrow. If it's a different topic of conversation, then could be completely different. But if we go into it presuming, making assumptions, having opinions, then we're going to cause ourselves issues. Have conversations, effectively communicate to identify what's what. Think about that iceberg theory, reduce what's underneath the surface. But just think that you've got to be able to go into it, and you've got to be able to make the most of that conversation. You can make the most out of that conversation, but you can also break that conversation. So think about yourself, think about your self-awareness, think about reflecting upon yourself. Okay, are you looking at it in that challenging way? Look at yourself in how you go into it. Are you being offensive? If you go in offensive, they will be defensive. Are you going into it with a preconceived judgment? If you're going into it with a preconceived judgment, you've got to try and get rid of that. Live each moment, each conversation, each individual piece as its own. Give it its own right, give it its own identity, and listen there. Actively listen, involve yourself, be present. Make sure that you're fully present in that moment. You're not elsewhere. You're not thinking about what's happening. If it's going bad, you're probably thinking, I want to get out of here. How can I get out of here? Looking at your phone, hoping somebody's going to call you. Be present. If you're present, you're going to build respect. You're going to build trust. Okay? Then you can look at any form of coaching model, the clear model, the grow model. But going into it with a coaching conversation, actually going into it, trying to identify where they're at, what they've done, what could they change, but asking them what they could change. You might have ideas, but save them. Let them come forth with the information. Let them give you those ideas. Because if they give you those ideas, again, they will be accountable. They will feel more empowered. And then you're actually in a position to help them with those solutions. If you're struggling, if they're struggling to find answers, to give answers, to recognize kind of where it is they want it to go, help them. Yeah, you don't have to give them the point straight away, but you can lead them to it. Lead them to different things. Just going back to something I mentioned earlier, is that if you're looking at things in their influence, so their behaviors, their actions, sometimes what you need to be able to do is to talk about the impact that they've had on others. So if they've acted in a negative manner, if they've acted in a way that isn't effective or good for the business or for the team, and it's impacted those around them, you need to let them know. You need to let them know that impact, Because again, if we don't know something, we don't know it. If I don't know that I've acted in a way that's impacted people in a negative way, if I haven't seen that, then actually how am I ever going to know that? And you'll probably find thinking, well, they've done this behavior, it's impacted on so and so. I don't really want to talk about that. That's the challenging piece. I've got to talk about it, but it's going to be difficult. But actually, chances are they didn't realize the impact it had. And once you've let them know the impact it's had, you'll find remorse. You'll genuinely find remorse. They're sorry for what they've done. They're sorry for the way that it's kind of happened. So really look at those elements within the circle of influence. Talk about the impact that they've had on others and themselves and their team. Stay away from that circle of concern, because if you're in that circle of concern for too much, for too long, that's going to cause an issue because they can't change anything. You're giving them feedback, you're telling them, you're challenging them about things they can't do anything about. And if you start doing that, what you're going to do is you're going to lose people. Yeah, you will lose people because actually they can see they can't do anything about it. They won't appreciate the fact that they've been put in that position to try and change something they can't do anything about. So you're going to lose all of the great stuff that you've done to build those relationships and everything else prior to that. So really think about what it is you're doing and how you're doing it. But I will just stress again, just reflect on yourself firstly. Reflect on how you approach it, what you do, how you do it, because I pretty much guarantee you it doesn't have to be a challenging conversation. It doesn't have to be conflict. Okay. And even if it is conflict, that can be another podcast. But even if it is around conflict management, that's a challenging conversation, but it's just effective communication. It's listening to understand. There's two sides to a story in conflict. So looking at those two sides is what's key. But just sticking with the challenging conversation again, that word itself impacts the outcome. So try to avoid challenging conversation. Just have a conversation. Just like I say to yourself, don't be your own worst critic, be your best analyzer. Don't tell somebody you want to give them some constructive criticism, because guess what? It's still criticism. So for yourself, just reflect on you. Think about how you do things, because if you do use those words, challenging and everything else, that's how it's going to come into it. So thinking about the last kind of piece for me, we've identified actions. You're going to go through that conversation. You need to identify actions, but get them to try and identify it. But don't leave it there. Too often I've seen these great conversations happening. I've seen these great actions that have happened, but nobody's checked in. And I hope you noticed there I said check in, not check up. A check up is very, very different, but a check in is just how's everything going. And when I have a check in with people, probably 10 times out of 10, maybe 9 times out of 10, but nine times out of 10, when I have a check in, people will start talking about things that they've talked about in the past. They'll start talking about things that actually have impacted them, that they want to discuss, they want to get off their chest. I'm not going into it saying, hey, what do you want to talk about? Tell me what happened here. Tell me what happened there. It's down to that person to bring that conversation forward. So when you've gone through this whole conversation, I am going to change that rhetoric at the end now, because hopefully we've learned not to call it challenging conversations. We're just going to talk about conversations. But once you get to that conversation, have that check-in. Don't lose that point. You have a check-in, you're going to get so much more. You're going to have a conversation again. And that person will end up talking about what has happened in terms of the actions that they identified. Of course, when you get to a point, you can say, hi, tell me about the actions. If they haven't got there, you can always bring it in, but it starts as a check-in, finishes as a check-in. How you doing? Everything good? Give me a shout if you need me. There's such a big difference between the two. So always end up with that check-in. Offer that support, offer that guidance if needed. If you're looking at that psychologically safe space, they will come back to you for support. They will come back to you when they're wavering. But remember that actually, if somebody is looking to change, if you have challenge somebody enough to get them to change their behavior or their attitude, that can be an ingrained thing. That doesn't necessarily have to be just a one-off. If you're doing that, somebody now is going through a huge change potentially. Change is uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is outside of our comfort zone. Most people, when they go through a change, they go through uncomfort, they stop because that uncomfortableness is too much. But push through that uncomfortableness and actually you'll get to the other end. So check-ins, conversations, actively listen, self-assess, self-reflect. There's so much we can do, folks. If you want to go into any of these points deeper, if you are looking to have a challenging conversation with anybody, put it in the chat function. I'm happy to arrange a call, have a chat, see what's going on. But there's a lot that we can do. But I do stress again, folks, it probably starts with you. So have a think about what that means. With that being said, I hope that you are able to reflect upon yourself, think about your self-awareness, think about your self-management, think about those around you and the impact that you have even when you're going into those conversations. Think about the language you have and the language that you use. But for now, I hope that you stay well, keep learning, and keep growing. Thank you for your time.